and welcome to a new episode of Talking Law, a podcast from Women in the Law UK. I'm Sally Penni, MBE, a barrister at Camworthy's Chambers, Manchester, and the Joint Vice Chair of the Association of Women Barristers. I'm also the founder of Women in the Law UK. You can find out more about what we do at womeninthelawyuk.com. Before we get to today's guest, I wanted to say a big thank you to Leigh for supporting this episode. Leigh are a unique law firm working for people in the UK and across the globe who have been injured, discriminated against, or had their human rights abused. More than 30 years old, Leigh now has staff of over 500 with main offices in London and Manchester. It is one of the Times top 100 law firms, and it is ranked at the highest level of the majority of its practice areas in both the law sector's independent legal directories, Chambers and Partners, and Legal 500. Now to today's guest, Frances Swaine. Frances, or Fran, as she asked to be called, is an experienced human rights and clinical negligence claims lawyer who has been working in the field for more than 25 years. She is a partner in the regulatory and disciplinary team at Leigh, as well as being the firm's first female managing partner. We started our conversation by talking about where Fran found her love for the law.
I think I've always had, or was brought up with, a very strong sense of social justice. And whereas perhaps as a young person that translated into protests and joining various things like amnesty, etc., as I became older, I realised that that wasn't sufficient, and I actually had to be doing something which was making a difference. I didn't go into the law straight from university. I actually worked in the civil service, and funnily enough, I worked with Brenda Hoggett, as she was then, Lady Hale, one of your recent interviewees. Yes. And when I was working with her, we got to know each other a little bit, and she encouraged me to go into the law. And I hadn't really thought about it as something that I would do, but I followed what she suggested because it did actually fit with my thought processes at the time.
Wow. How amazing that even then she was inspiring young women everywhere, really.
Yes, very much.
Yes. And what was it like when you did, once you had a role at first, I suppose, before law, once you were in the law, did you notice that there were fewer women then?
I did funnily enough, in the firm that I received a training contract in, and it was quite hard to get one because I was a mature student, I suppose, not much older than the newly qualified sort of age, but I was a bit older. It took a while to get a contract, and I ended up in a firm which was almost entirely white men. And they treated me differently. I remember particularly a golfing day when all the men went off to the golfing and I was left in the office to work. It wasn't a very big practice, and I actually learned a lot there. But that did feel very different. However, I did come to Leigh in 1991. I've been here 30 years. Wow. And there were only about 10 people in the firm when I joined. And of course, it had been set up by Sarah Leigh, who joined forces with a former trainee of hers, Martin Day. So right from the start, 30 years ago, I was working with quite a formidable female lawyer who was very encouraging to me from the start.
Yes. And so did that leave an impression with you, really, to want to be the same for those entering the firm, women and others with other protected characteristics, if you like. Not that being a woman's a protected characteristics, but you know what I mean, sort of be a role model.
I think very much so. And as far as Sarah went in terms of, and Martin, the firm has always been more than 50% female. It's a very unusual law firm in that respect. And there have always been quite a number of women who have had posts in the firm that were senior.
Yes. Now, I'd like to ask you, Fran, about a memorable case. Now, I'll allow you to have more because you've been involved in some really leading world-leading cases. But when you first became managing partner, you continued to practice, didn't you, as a solicitor, which is unusual, I suppose, in some respects.
When I became managing partner here 10 years ago, we'd not had a managing partner before, so it was a new role. And I don't think it was thought at the time that it would be a role which would be a full-time position. So when I took it on, it was assumed that I'd go on practicing at the same time as developing the role. But it became obvious over about a 5-year period that that wasn't really possible from the point of view of clients. I missed the legal work, but it wasn't possible to do the two things together. So I did practice for the 3 or 4 years in particular, and then had to pass my cases on so that the clients would be properly dealt with. It was taking me too long between, I didn't miss any time limits or anything like that, but not I wasn't working in the way that I would want to work with clients because the managing partner role was taking over in terms of what I needed to do to keep the practice going. And so far as being a role model, I think I've wanted to be a role model, but also I think to inspire other people to always do their best and to make sure that internally Leigh Day has always been representative of across the board in terms of reflective anyway of the London population and who might be working here at all different levels, whether they are achieving partnership or working in some of the areas which are not actually legal, but perhaps would be these days known as business support.
In terms of memorable cases, are there some cases that have stuck with you or have meant a lot to you throughout your career?
There have been quite a number, and it's hard to pin down which is more memorable than others. But I think in recent years, memorably, I was involved in helping the tenants on the Lakanal house fire site who were in a tower block which was not the one where the cladding exploded and killed 6 people, but it's so reflective of what happened at Grenfell that the involvement that I had in supporting the tenants in the other blocks has made me think so long and hard about what didn't happen after the Lakanal House inquiry, which might have prevented the Grenfell fire altogether. It has stuck in my mind as a piece of work that I did, which was very valuable, but wasn't valuable enough. So that is something I sort of carry with me. We got to the stage where there were a lot of recommendations about cladding, but nobody acted on them.
Yes.
Lots of experiences which are quite unusual as a result of having set up the Human Rights Department here. I think at a time when there weren't really departments in the country. Obviously, there were people doing judicial reviews and inquests and so on. Yeah. But setting up a department based around the Human Rights Act, I think we were the first. We had a launch in 2001, I think. And cases flowing from that were quite few and very interesting. Yes. And perhaps looking into the request for another inquest into the death of David Kelly, it's also something which stuck with me for a long time in the approach to the Attorney General. And of course, that case is still floating along today in terms of how did David Kelly actually die. And I worked for a long time with a group of doctors whose views were that the outcome that had been decided couldn't possibly be the right one because they didn't believe that the medical evidence was such as to have shown he committed suicide. So that's another really interesting piece of work, which didn't result in the inquest that they wanted, but was a fascinating case for me to be involved in. Now, those are very unusual cases, both of them. And yeah. I've worked with an awful lot of client families over the years in inquests, in clinical negligence cases, in judicial reviews, whose cases might not be as prominent in the headlines, But I think I'd find that almost all of them have stayed with me. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that just because they're not headlines cases, they're not memorable. I think one tends to remember them all in different ways. As far as the child migrants go, I started working on that case in 1992.
Wow.
And it's only about 2 years ago that those resolved in a meaningful way for those child migrants still alive in Australia and some in New Zealand. It is probably the most memorable of cases in terms of its breadth and the number of people, children who were migrated early in the years after the Second World War to Australia without passports, without birth certificates, and often without their families knowing, because children in those days in children's homes wouldn't necessarily be orphans, even if they were told that they were. And so that resolving after an inquiry was a very big thing. I think finally, I'm just going to mention one more case which has meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
And that was in relation to the death of a young woman in Hong Kong, Harinder Viraya, the wife of Martin Jakes, who died in Hong Kong. And we investigated. There was a compensation claim as a result of medical negligence in the hospital where she went after an epileptic fit. It was always thought by the family that she wasn't treated medically appropriately because of racism in the hospital. And although that wasn't a part of the compensation in the end, it did lead to a change in legislation in Hong Kong. It was the first piece of anti-racist legislation that was ever introduced. And it was something that was written about a lot in the press at that time. She died in 2000, and we achieved the legislation in about 2006. And it's made a big difference to whether or not people can be treated in the way that she was treated in the hospital at the time. So that's another very memorable case to me. I sat as a trustee on the Harinder Viraya Trust for many years subsequent to the settlement.
Yes.
We look after school children in near Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, in the school that Harinder was brought up in herself, and that stayed with me for a long time.
Absolutely. It's almost like the ultimate for us lawyers. I know I'm at the bar, but isn't it to make sure or to desire that our work has impact and effect? And actually, that case led to a change in legislation. It's almost like out of circumstances that one would not have wanted to have existed. But that's quite an achievement, isn't it? That a case that you worked on led to a change in legislation. And so I congratulate you on that. It's quite powerful. I don't know if you thought that at the time or whether you were just got on with it. Is it reflective that you think, actually, wow, I or we achieved that?
It was definitely a we, because Martin Jakes himself was very involved in that. And he's a journalist and he wrote a lot of the articles. But in being part of the case, and at the time, perhaps it didn't feature quite so prominently because we were very keen to sort out things with the hospital. But certainly in retrospect, understanding that a piece of legislation which had never existed previously was introduced is something I feel I can be proud of.
Yes, absolutely. Rightly so. Now, Fran, I want to ask you about the managing partner role and what it encompasses. Now, in modern times, I've had to watch a lot of legal television, mainly because my mother phones me to say, "Oh, you might learn something," unbeknownst to the fact that most of it is American. But in modern times, there's a program called Suits. And it's an American program where the managing partner is very much designer outfits. She has a certain walk to go with the outfit. She's very tall and elegant, Jessica Pearson. She's a tall black woman. As I'm looking at you, I'm loving, you look very chilled. Did you just set out to be as your authentic self? And was that part of it? Did you make that a conscious decision?
Yes, well, I don't know if I did it consciously, but anybody that knows me would probably, I hope anyway, endorse the fact that I am genuine and authentic, and I would have looked similar to that, in that I don't think you'd ever catch me walking around in suits and stilettos. Even for appearing at some evening function. Not to say I wouldn't get smartened up, but it would have to be my way. I think the one thing about being the managing partner, though, when one's looking at authenticity, is that in terms of what skills you bring to that role, you can remain authentic and you can remain genuine. But in an old-fashioned partnership where everybody's vote counts, you need to make sure that you bring everybody with you all of the time, or as much of the time as you possibly can. Your authenticity is around being honest and straightforward with individuals, whilst they need to realise sometimes that you're pushing something through which doesn't suit all 35 people.
Yes.
It's a balancing act to be had. I would hope my colleagues would feel that I'm always upfront and straight with them, but they would also know that they can't always all have me on their side every time, even if when I'm having a beer with them after work, it feels a bit different.
Yes.
I think it's a bit different to just is not the right word. It's a bit different to being a lawyer without those management responsibilities. I think you can be 100% you. I think with the management responsibilities, you are you, but you've also got to make sure everybody understands the different facets of the people you're representing. It's a balancing act.
And Fran, in recent years, you've steered Leigh through some choppier waters, as it were, as you faced accusations from the regulator, the SRA, which resulted in hearing in front of the Solicitor Disciplinary Tribunal, which is a very long hearing, and you defended all the allegations, and the firm succeeded. And I just wanted to ask you, really, part of the role is not just the good times, there is also the choppier times. COVID has also shown us that, hasn't it? Mm-hmm. What was it like coming through that hearing?
That was a 4-year process. I well remember the first day when on a Saturday morning, we all happened actually to be in the firm because the partners were having an away day. And we were served with documentation from the SRA completely out of the blue from the regulator, saying that someone would be arriving on the Monday morning to look at various things in the firm. From that period, for a 4-year process, it built up to a tribunal hearing at which there were 212 charges against us, against the firm and against our senior partner and two other another partner and one of our assistant solicitors, and I represented the partnership and the firm. It was a very complicated case which required a huge amount of effort on behalf of the practice. We set aside quite a number of solicitors and paralegals who were going to do nothing but help with the defence. Yes. We were shunned within the legal community quite a lot, and financially it was difficult for a long time. And of course, within a partnership, I think I had to bring all my mettle together, if that's the right word, to help encourage and keep together a group of individuals who obviously have all joined up and signed up to be part of a whole. But when there are difficult times, it's not always straightforward, I think, for each individual to feel that they're still remaining part of something. So I think it was probably the most difficult period for the practice. And as the managing partner, there was not only double the work to do, running the practice, but also running the defence. We had the most wonderful barrister, Patricia Robertson, who masterminded from the legal side of things. And she was certainly someone that I could lean on at all times. But aside from that, it was something that I would say certainly taxed me to the full, and the hardest thing I probably have ever done.
Yes. Now we're in another hard period. COVID has impacted all our lives. And I just so touched by your 3 o'clock messages to the staff at Leigh Day, and every day, even before, well, I don't know if it was before the real height of the pandemic, and I'm thinking, the recent months, but you started sending messages, didn't you, to your staff just to keep morale going. You've managed to avoid redundancies, which is commendable, because it's something I'm very concerned about. I'm concerned about the mental health of people in the profession and those entering, and morale. So just tell me why you started sort of leading from the top, really, with compassion, and wanted to make sure, if at all possible, there were no redundancies in this period.
Well, I think right from the start, there was a management board decision that we would try to ensure that everybody kept their jobs and to make sure that the firm kept running as normal. My view about an organisation really is that everybody should know each other and be part of a whole. Leigh Day is always, in the old days when there were not so many people here as there are now, and now we are 500 people, which is quite a size.
Wow.
But back at the beginning, we always used to refer to ourselves as the Leigh Day family. And we still do, though it's now a large and more disparate family, given that we have 2 main offices, one in London and the other in Manchester.
Yes.
But I did foresee right from the beginning of the pandemic that it would be very easy for an organisation to fall apart if communication was not at its very top. And therefore, making sure that we've always had an idea internally, and particularly as managing partner, it's been very important to me to make sure that everybody involved in the practice feels part of one and is always functioning, looking after each other. So the idea of the 3 o'clock messages, which are nearly a year old now, I think they started on about the 15th of March or something like that, giving information about how we were going to work from home and who was going to do what. Of course, at the time, I assumed it was going to be for 2 or 3 months. So it is extraordinary that now, nearly 12 months on, I'm still sending out a message every day at 3 o'clock. But the intention was to bring everybody together as a unit and make sure that they felt part of a whole. And we've done a lot of very different things, from messages which are very perfunctory about things like how to work from home and how to maintain resilience, and sort of exhorting people to go out at lunchtime for a walk every day, and bringing in courses for people who need to supervise as to how they can supervise remotely, but also lots of things which perhaps might be thought more frivolous, like competitions for children to paint pictures in half terms, or we had a photographic competition last summer, and Christmas trees. And I think this week we've had St. David's Day celebrations, all in the 3 o'clock emails. They're always
Wonderful.
very different.
Yes.
I have to say that during the course of the year, I've had a huge number of people writing back to me saying how important the messages have been.
Yes.
My view is that it's not necessarily the content of the message, but it's the fact that it happens. That they know that every day at 3 o'clock there'll be something which connects them to Leigh Day, so they can feel part of the firm, even though they might not have seen any colleagues in person since last March.
Yes, and it's so important. I mean, I know about it, not just from my research, but from people telling me about it, from your staff who were saying, when we talk about well-being on webinars that I've been hosting throughout the pandemic. So that's how I know about it. So it really is impactful on all the people at Leigh Day. One of the things that Leigh Day is being proud of is to embrace diversity. And I ask a lot about diversity, and I'm very concerned about it. I set up a women's organisation open to men as well. I'm very concerned about race, social mobility. There's a whole list of things that I'm concerned about in our profession and how we can make it better. And I want you just to tell us really specifically about what Leigh Day's been doing about diversity, especially the apprentice program, which I know came from you, and tell us why you're so proud of it, because you've got, I want to say 6 apprentices now, but I think it's gone up since then.
Yes, we've actually got 10 now, because four new Black apprentices started this January. We had 6 who started the January before. So that is a program I'm very proud of, actually. We had tried for quite some time to recruit trainee solicitors to the practice who were more diverse than those we were managing to appoint.
Yes.
And had started to try to manage that, well, over a decade ago, I think now, by doing all sorts of things, from blinding applications so nobody could see names and addresses, to taking the postcodes of people who were applying and trying to find out where it was that they were likely to be applying from. But we were not getting any more successful in appointing those of African or Afro-Caribbean heritage to a trainee program. And when the apprentices program was launched by the government, I started looking into whether this was something we could use internally. And we had a series of anti-bias trainings specifically for our trainee recruitment panel, which resulted 2 years ago in no improvement whatsoever in the ethnic mix of those who were being welcomed into Leigh Day. And I felt we really had to do something about that. So we launched, I did take some council's advice on making sure that this was not going to be something which was challengeable. And actually the response was, well, we don't know. It's never been done before. Give it a go if you want to, but beware it might be challenged. But we launched a program nearly 2 years ago.
Yes, 2019.
That's right, for young people. The purpose is that you have not been to university, so you cannot have a degree. You can have started a degree and decided to leave it, but most of our apprentices are school leavers and haven't actually put the toe in the water of a degree. We were very successful in our first year, but almost all the applicants were women. So the second year, we narrowed our focus even further and simply asked for men of Afro-Caribbean or African origin. And we have 4 wonderful new male apprentices who started this January. And it should mean over the period of time that they work with us, it takes 5 to 6 years for each of those individuals to qualify, that the ethnic mix of solicitors in the practice will have changed quite considerably by the time they finish their qualifications.
Wow. And that's really your legacy. It's not your only legacy, but in the firm to actually be taking active steps, because you're right. When you just detailed and documented what you were doing, it's what most law firms are trying to do, but the outcome hasn't resulted in anything, incredibly different, has it? So wonderful to see that the apprentices program has really come on and is doing so well. It just fills certainly me and the listeners with confidence about how we can make our profession more diverse.
I'm very proud of all of them, because a lot of them would not have had that opportunity. And as soon as they've been in post, they've proved themselves immediately as individuals with so much to offer. And it's wonderful to see them starting to bloom internally, even though a lot of the time that they've been with us, it's been COVID.
Yes, of course. Which leads me nicely to what I was going to ask, which is some advice and maybe not counsel, but guidance for aspiring or entrants into the profession now?
One of the most important things is to work out why it is you want to be a lawyer. So when you've found your hook, as it were, you need to keep focused on that particular reason, because as you say, I think it may be harder to get a contract, to get a pupillage. You may have to do something else for a little while before you finally get what you need in order to get trained. I think as far as solicitors go, you shouldn't be too fussy about your method of becoming a solicitor. I think with the introduction of different methods of qualification, there is the possibility that some people will think the old-fashioned method of going to a red brick university and getting a sort of top-notch training contract is the way to go. I think that should be cast away. People should be very happy to qualify by a range of different routes. And in terms of, I suppose, the sort of law that is undertaken at Leigh has always fitted with me perfectly, because it is a route generally to social justice, particularly for members of the global population who might not otherwise manage that.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to have your eye on the people that it is you want to assist. So, for me, it wasn't difficult to think of those areas. I would think that for individuals dreaming of becoming lawyers, perhaps a bit younger, before they've even got their A-levels, they need to focus on the sort of areas that they'd want to do.
Yes. Now, Fran, the R word, retirement. You've had 30 odd years as a successful lawyer. I don't believe in retirement. I should declare that right now. Are you really retiring? And what's next?
What I'm doing very definitely at the end of March is stepping down from the role as managing partner. It's been a full-time, all-consuming role for a decade now. And it's something that it's time I stopped doing, both from my own point of view, but also for the benefit of the practice. I very much believe in refreshing change, and it's time someone else took over the reins in that respect.
Yes.
I'd quite like to go on practicing some law for some years to come. I certainly am not the sort of person who's looking forward to tending my garden or things that sometimes attract people as they come towards doing less work. I think my interest in social justice has not changed. I haven't had a huge amount of opportunity in recent years to practice law and help people in the community that perhaps would not have access to justice otherwise. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to go on doing that for a while to come yet, until I feel ready to stop. But even then, I think perhaps you're not believing in retirement. It's not so much I don't believe in retirement. It's just, I suppose, I don't feel ready for
yes,
enough slowing down to feel that I'm going to be satisfied in life by meeting friends and doing those enjoyable things, which no doubt one will do, but I've been doing them anyway from time to time. So I'm hoping to go on in the legal profession for some time yet.
When you started in law, and Leigh as a whole has brought cases which ought to be brought, whether they were challenging discriminatory practices or discriminatory conduct or social justice cases. And they're cases that were right to be brought or had to be challenged. And I wonder if you think there's still an appetite for that, for people saying that's not right.
Yes, I think there is still an appetite for them to be brought. And I'm sure here at Leigh, it's something that we still do. And there is an appetite in our human rights department to do that work. And I think there are other firms still that I'm aware of. However, I think I say that with a certain intake of breath, simply because I think the funding difficulties that have come about in the last decade, or probably longer now, make it difficult, particularly for small firms, to concentrate hugely on sort of social justice or moral cases, if they can't balance that work with other work which is going to bring in sufficient fees simply to keep the practice going. So there are going to be some pro bono units, which I would applaud if they're working properly within the community. And there are going to be other firms where their margins or profits are very small and they can manage that and they can continue to go on doing those sorts of cases. I think it's harder without legal aid, which might even be the thing which in the past actually made the firm able to function, and you still did a few pro bono or cases which you knew weren't going to result in a huge financial outcome. The world does look rather different now, but I think the appetite is there. And in order to inspire young people to proceed in the law along the sort of route that many lawyers at Leigh Day will have taken, we need to keep that appetite alive.
Yes.
Certainly in my weekly meetings with the solicitor apprentices, I have a weekly meeting with all of them, with one of my partner colleagues here and one of our external consultants. It's the sort of thing that we talk to them about, alongside making sure that they understand the way the firm functions in other respects, be that from a business perspective or the types of law that are undertaken. Absolutely crucial, though. It's what a lawyer really, we have such an important role in the world, upholding the rule of law and making sure that reaches every single individual. We can't afford to let go of it.
I couldn't agree more. The rule of law is so important. I'm going to ask you about books. I'm an avid reader. We have a book club. I wonder if you've got a favourite book and why, and also if you've got a favourite fictional lawyer that you could share with me.
I'm a very keen reader, actually. I was brought up in a very reading household and have always been surrounded by books. I found this quite a difficult thing to think about in terms of a favourite book, actually. And I started thinking of Desert Island Discs. And so I was going to say that I need to have Shakespeare and the Bible as books that I could always refer to for reading. In terms of actually favourite books, I was thinking what sort of things introduced me in a favourite kind of way to the views and theories that I have to date. And that's looking back to my adolescence, I think. And I'll mention just two books from that. One's called Touch the Earth, which is a series of writings by Native Americans dating back to the 19th century, talking about their philosophy and their understanding of what land is, which is not owned by anybody. And that gave me an understanding of the world, which I don't think I got from anywhere else. At the same time, I was reading globally quite a lot, and Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country, which I think is probably a book hardly read these days, but it introduced me to apartheid in South Africa, not necessarily in a way that I'd want to read about it now, actually, but it wasn't something I was aware of before then. And it helped me to formulate my views on politics as a sort of 13 or 14-year-old, which I've never lost. So both favourite memories of books which introduced me to a world which I still inhabit. In terms of a very recent book, I've much enjoyed Half a Yellow Sun.
Yes.
And I think that's something, I know a lot of book clubs have been through that, probably read in your book club.
Yes.
I enjoyed it tremendously, both for sort of teaching me things that I didn't know before, but also for the style of writing, which I think is beautiful, and a female voice. There still aren't enough female voices, I think, amongst books. So I'm sorry that isn't just one book, and some of it is about memory as much as it is about a favourite read today.
And what about favourite fictional lawyer? Do you have one?
Well, I don't really. I came up with a favourite fictional policeman, and that's Maygrave.
Who is that?
Maigret, that's right, a French crime writer from the 1950s, and just thinking somebody who thought through from a legal perspective as well as a criminal perspective. The books are written by a man called Simenon, and Maigret is his detective, but he's a detective who thinks through things in a judicial way.
Oh, we might have to read that
I think you'd enjoy them. Yes,
yes,
I think you'd enjoy them.
I've made a note of those. If a film or a BBC movie was going to be made about you, who would you like to play you?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I'd give anybody that role. No, I don't think I'm going to land anyone with that.
Oh, well, I'll land. I was thinking, actually, Dame Helen Mirren would be quite good, actually.
Oh, goodness.
Yes, but she'd have to grow a hair.
She would, Anne. Yes, she would.
And make sure it's curled.
I'd be honoured.
But it's a reflective point, isn't it? So I suppose looking back at the young Frances Swaine, what advice would you give that young woman as they were entering the law?
To listen and to be patient and to concentrate hard and only to follow those areas of work that you think are really valuable.
Yes, what great advice. Even I'm writing that down. So, Fran, just before we finish, gosh, I could speak to you all day if I'm quite honest. I suppose a final point, if I may, Fran, is as we look at women in leadership, one, do we still need women leaders? And I would hope you would say yes, so it's a rhetorical question. But secondly, any kind of advice or tips for women thinking about becoming leaders?
Well, we definitely still need women leaders. Yes, I certainly agree with you about that. I think you do need to be genuine and authentic. You need to make sure that your own voice is heard and that you're clear about that voice. You need to speak up for other women because if you don't, it's not going to happen. And you need to protect some of the things that women need protecting as you become more and more senior. I've been very sad to read, assuming it's all correct, in the papers fairly recently that during the COVID period, the women in the home have gone back to a sort of 1950s profile rather than what it was like previously, and the amount of lack of sharing that they've had of childcare or domestic duties, which perhaps with hindsight one could have anticipated, but certainly going into lockdown, I doubt that many women were thinking of things in those terms. So it does just go to show how important it is to protect everything that's been fought and won and not to take for granted by women generally in the workplace.
Absolutely. Fran Swaine, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I can't wait till the next chapters, and I'm always happy to go to Chelsea Flower Show, of course. I'm sure you are too. I don't want people to think I love gardening. I'm just saying not to spend the entire retirement in it, which you're not going to be doing, so that we can all still have your experience and your clever brain. So thank you so much for joining me on Talking Law.
Thank you very much, Sally. It's been a pleasure.
Many thanks to Frances Swaine for spending time talking to me during this interview. And thanks to Leigh for supporting this episode. You can find out more at leighday.co.uk. I'd love you to get in touch and let me know what you think of the podcast. And do get in touch, and you can follow me at Sally Penni 1. Thanks to our production team, Sam Walker and Michael Blaze at What Goes On Media. Bye for now.